This episode contains discussions around suicide, addiction, and if you or someone you know is in need of support or crisis intervention, call or text 988 Suicide Lifeline.
You know, I stand in front of a few hundred folks and have this conversation about it's okay to not be okay and you're not alone. And, you know, everyone's dealing with something and kind of walk through the current status of the industry. And those individuals, men and women alike, that come up and they're teary-eyed and emotional and they hug your neck and shake your hand and say, thanks, we should have been talking about this 30 years ago.
Welcome to The Power of Construction, a Procore podcast highlighting the leaders who are evolving their business today to forge a better industry tomorrow. I'm Sasha Reed.
And I'm Chris Langiza.
And on today's episode, Chris, we're going to dive into some of the hidden costs of ignoring worker well-being. And this topic is really very timely, especially against the backdrop of some of the CDC's most recent statistics. And I think they're worth mentioning. I want to kind of make sure I get this right. So when we look at the numbers around worker well-being, in the U.S., the construction industry has a 4 times higher rate of suicide than the national average. And deaths by suicide are 5 times that of other construction fatalities combined. So when we think about these statistics, I think they're important to speak to in order to put this issue in black and white, because the statistics are rather sobering.
They absolutely are. And I think what's one of the things that's most amazing is that we're not talking about it more, and that we're not doing more today to combat some of these statistics and move the direction that they're headed in. And so, you know, I think this is a great opportunity, and we've got a fantastic guest today to talk about some of the things that we can be doing to really focus on the mental well-being of the people that we spend so much of our times with working in construction and on the projects that we work with, and how to make sure they're not just set up for success to do their job, but they're set up for success for themselves, and to be sound as human beings.
Yeah, and I don't think we could have found a better guest for today. I would call him a passionate, enthusiastic leader around all things health and safety, but specifically around mental health. So with that, welcome, Brandon Anderson. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to have you. I called you a passionate leader. Is that an accurate description? Will you accept that description?
I will. Yes, I'll accept that.
Well, for those who don't know Brandon, let me give you a little bit of a quick introduction. He is the Vice President of Safety at AGC, Missouri. He has over 27 years experience as a construction safety professional, advocate for total worker well-being with a focus on mental health, suicide prevention, and substance misuse. In 2022, he co-founded AGC's of America's National Task Force, Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. And recently, you were identified as the 988 champion, nationally recognized, which is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And truly, it is considered to be the primary national lifeline for mental health crisis and support in the United States. That's a pretty amazing honor.
It's humbling for sure.
Well, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you. Brandon, to kick us off, I really would love if you would start by telling us a little bit about your entry or your journey into construction, and also a little bit about how did AGC's mental health focus really come about?
Sure. So my journey into construction began at a very young age. My biological father had a construction company in the state of Arkansas. All my uncles and grandfather all have been in construction, so it's in the family. And that's where I cut my teeth, so to speak, from about 12 years old on. And then just moved around from there, other companies. I worked for the Department of Transportation for a while as well, locally back home in Missouri. And eventually, after a 17-year stint with them, went to work for AGC of Missouri.
Wow. And so what was kind of the path that led you with the work that you're doing with AGC into more specific focus on mental health? What is your personal passion, I guess, come from or stem from?
So personally, I have plenty of lived experience from childhood through my adult life as dealing with mental health, much of which was my own. Some of it was family and friends, many in the construction industry as well. I've always been an individual that, people have felt comfortable talking to. So in various roles and leadership throughout my career, you end up not being just a supervisor, right? You're also a therapist or a doctor or a shoulder for someone. So that's what led me, that my passion began there, just kind of naturally, if you will. When I came to work for AGC of Missouri, the year prior, they had just launched a suicide prevention task force or team in Missouri that really has turned into a national model. They set the stage for a lot of what we're seeing across the country. It's evolved many times over. COVID had just began right after I was hired in, and
tough.
Yeah, it was not a good situation, as we all know, and most of us don't even want to talk about COVID. My predecessor took over the responsibility of leading the COVID efforts and handed me the suicide prevention team and said, "Hey, I know you're passionate, make it yours." And I ran with it.
And you've got a personal connection and a really deep passion. This is not just something that you've experienced by people that you've worked with in construction, but something that's a little bit closer to home. Do you mind sharing that?
No, I don't mind at all. I think it's important to share, our lived experiences, just to let really everyone know, maybe not everyone, but the majority know that they're not alone. For me, again, it started at a young age, without a lot of detail, but there wasn't any kind of abuse that I didn't experience from starting in third grade through my young teenage years. That weighs on you. It's traumatic, and you carry that through adulthood, and it shapes who you are. At a young age, I would say I was probably 12, was personally for me my first attempt. I'm a survivor twofold, if you will, where I'm a lost survivor. I've lost a number of individuals, family and friends alike, many of which from the construction industry. Then I'm also a survivor from the standpoint of as an attempt survivor, where not only did I attempt when I was a teen, I've attempted as an adult as well some years back, where I just found myself in a really bad place, really dark place, and felt like there was no other way to end the pain than to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brandon, up until a few years ago, nobody was really having this conversation about mental health, the impacts it was having on our industry. What do you think the biggest catalyst for that change has been?
Nobody's a big word. There's definitely some pockets of folks around the country and a select few that had been sounding the alarm. But as far as where we're at today, nothing on the scale that where we're at. I think one of the biggest components was COVID. It really, from a societal standpoint, ripped the Band-Aid off, so to speak.
Yeah, on a lot of things.
Yeah, but mental health being one of them. And it really put it in the forefront. And not that, it was something to capitalize on, but it definitely was a driver of what's going on in the construction industry. I mean, these individuals were identified as essential workers.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no work from home, or there was no break, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
It was keep going and figure out how to do it. It's also the data. The number of people we're losing to suicide alone is alarming and unsustainable. Overdose. The substance use deaths are even higher in many cases, and again, unsustainable. So thankfully, there was a number of individuals nationally I'd like to say AGC was one of them, as far as an association or organization that really stood up and took some action to draw attention to it from the stigma standpoint for awareness, but then also to take action to try to implement or discover ways to stop it or slow it down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is construction as an industry is kind of in this perfect storm scenario. I mean, you're mentioning COVID, but when we look at those statistics, a lot of those statistics, construction has risen to the top of that list in the last 4 years. So when we think about what is it about construction as an industry that sets us up to be in this perfect storm, to have a crisis around mental health?
Sure. The construction industry is made up of some of the best individuals out there. We will find a way to get things done. What brought it really to the forefront is the in-your-face aspect of it, of what came from COVID. But again, these numbers, these issues were there prior. You take a couple of organizations at the right time, it was really the stars aligned, I think. Looking back now, 4 years, 5 years in some cases.
Yeah, just about.
The stars aligned for there to be a perfect opportunity to take action and really draw attention to it. And it has caught on. There's organizations that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, weren't even talking about this. In some cases, didn't want to.
Right.
Weren't even comfortable approaching the subject. And here we are today. And I mean, some of them are practically leading the way.
Yeah.
They've just jumped on board.
Well, it's not just the organizations. I think it's a lot of the people. I think there's a lot of people more willing to have this conversation today than they were 4 or 5 years ago. I think if you tried to bring this up in a local association meeting or at an event,
a board meeting,
I think people would have really had very little ability to kind of talk about it more freely like we need to in order to come to a solution for certain.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of look at what some of those factors are that are going into why we may be at the point we're at today. And when we had conversation preparing for this talk today, you had talked about safety culture, the long hours and work demands, separation from support systems, workforce shortfall, projected loss of workers. You had talked to some of these things. Let's start with the safety culture. Talk to me about how the safety culture in construction has evolved over time, and does this give us a bit of a glimmer of hope?
Yeah, I mean, historically, look how old OSHA is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is relatively young in the grand scheme of things. Even if you go back 100 years, there was still safety on job sites to a certain point, but nothing like the regulations and the oversight we see today. But even with that, with change is hard. We're humans. You look at the demographic makeup, the age aspect from a generational standpoint, the makeup of the industry. It's historically been the baby boomer generation has made up the bigger part of the industry. And now we're seeing where many of them have not retired, and there's this mix.
Right.
Right. So there's just a different way of doing things, and change is hard. I can remember when we shifted from not wearing safety vests to having to have a safety vest on, and the uproar.
Yeah.
And now look where we are today, from helmets to, and hard hats and that whole situation. So the cultures, I don't think anyone comes to work like, I can't wait to get hurt, or I'm hoping my crew gets hurt. Even the toughest, just crusty, roughest guys and gals out there that have been in the industry a long time, they're not wanting any of their crew to get injured.
Yeah, they genuinely care. They want their people to go home safe at the end of the day.
Yeah, they truly do. They just want to be able to do their job and be left alone. However, the job's dangerous.
Yeah.
So, and you start making changes, you start making implementations to the industry, their normal way of doing business, so to speak. And you're going to get some resistance and some pushback, and it does cause issues.
And one of the things you had talked about was kind of the long hours. So, and as as we know very well, the demand for construction is not slowing. The demand for projects to get completed is not, has not been as greatly impacted by some of the economic factors around us. There's still a pretty decent backlog in the system. So we know that there's some demand for those long hours and separation from support systems. What about those two things in particular do you think is exacerbating some of the challenges we're having?
Sure. Those two specific factors are a huge contributor to what we're seeing in the industry. It's incredible. The demand for work has not really slowed down, which is great for the economy, the country, and the workforce. But the days of I'm going to work in my local community for 30 years and retire are pretty much over for the construction industry. My father retired as soon as he was possible because he refused to drive 45 minutes to the job site. He was not going to drive from home for one way. Yeah. I drive an hour to get to the office one way. Sometimes with traffic, it's an hour and a half.
Yep.
So it's, and that's just in a span of 20 years, right? That's not a lot of time. The long hours aspect of it, you're working 10 hours, you're actually on a job site physically for 10 hours. Well, you got to figure the travel time to get there.
Right. Yep. Right. Yep.
And then the travel time to get home. Mm-hmm. And then if you have a family or just, even if you don't, just the normal daily activities of life, that's a 16-hour day or more before you're even able to sit down and probably relax. The travel aspect, again, people aren't working in their community. So we're seeing transient workforce, if you will, where they're traveling all over the country and not just for a week or two. They're months, years in some cases. And they're flying back every couple of weeks, sometimes to see their family or not at all. It's causes its own stressors in regards to being away from that support system.
It's definitely a unique set of challenges that our industry is faced with. I mean, I just remember when I was on job sites, I was leaving the house at 5 a.m. I was getting home at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And that wasn't just me. That was kind of everybody, right? And then you were probably getting home and doing more work when you got there because you didn't get a bunch of stuff done at the job site. So you were trying to do some other things. And so just puts this extra strain on you as an individual, both physically, but also mentally and on your relationships in a lot of ways too. And I think that's what makes this challenge so difficult to solve is it's like you said, it's a little bit of that perfect storm. It's the culmination of a lot of different things that are happening in our industry or have been happening in our industry for a long time, now starting to kind of formulate this really interesting place where we sit today.
And one of the things you had said, interesting, was the number of generations. I think the most recent I've heard is 5, maybe even we're about to get into the 6th generation to be under one umbrella, one organization, one roof, if you will.
Yeah.
From a projected loss of workforce, this was something that you had shared with us. By 2031, it's projected that 30% of the workforce will retire, and with potential losses reaching up to 50% if the current trends continued. So as you think about some of these additional factors of losing some of that substantial part of the workforce, and then the younger generation that's coming in. I know I recently did a LinkedIn Live and we were talking about the labor shortage, and somebody had commented and said, we now have new hires coming in saying, when do we work from home? He's like, how do I explain that piece to them? How do we talk about that? So as you think about that, how is that impacting some of the conversations?
Yeah. How do we work from home? I'm not sure how you would pour concrete or swing steel and set that from home. Interesting concept though, right? Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see where we are from a generational standpoint, the potential for workforce shortage. And quite frankly, we're already short now. I mean, I don't know any company that's not hiring anyone or is not looking. I mean, I was just in Charlotte, North Carolina, a few weeks back, and that company that I was speaking at said that in the next 12 months we'll double. They're going to go from like 350 to almost 600 plus employees. Wow. Is their goal in the next 12 months. Well, where are you going to get those people when they're currently short staffed?
Yeah.
And if nothing changes, as you said, 2030, 2031, we could see a deficit even greater just through natural attrition, whether it's retirement or age out or moving on. And we do have a different workforce coming to work.
Yeah, very different.
Different expectations, different ways of communication. And that adds another layer of stress for the industry workforce that's already here, and then very well could impact those that are coming in, or maybe even push them away.
I want to get your take on this, because to take a word from NAWIC, construction is a male-populated industry.
Sure.
And to take a word from Fred Mills, the T word, talking about your feelings or your emotional state or your mental health, is not the most comfortable. But I've actually found that once you open the dialogue and you open the door, it's almost like a floodgates is opened, and there's a willingness to not only have a conversation around it, but there's a desire from those, especially in the field, they want to know they're seen.
Absolutely.
They want to know that their employer understands the pressure that they're under. Are you finding the same?
Without question. It's interesting, the number of individuals that come up to me that in some cases, are much older than I am, if not old enough to be almost my grandfather in some situations. And you're talking, I stand in front of a few hundred folks and have this conversation about it's okay to not be okay, and you're not alone, and everyone's dealing with something, and kind of walk through the current status of the industry. And those individuals, men and women alike, that come up and they're teary-eyed and emotional, and they hug your neck and shake your hand and say, thanks, we should have been talking about this 30 years ago.
Yeah. So
there is a desire to talk about it. But, and if you look at it from a generational workforce standpoint, going back, the thought process, or what was, taught, if you will, was mind your business, keep your head down, go to work,
don't ask questions.
That's right. Do what you're told.
That's right.
Be on time and get paid and come home, right? Don't make a scene. Don't draw attention to yourself, right? Don't pry. Don't talk about these so-called taboo subjects or share too much. When as humans, we want to connect, right? And these it's been really incredible to see these individuals come up and say, thank you so much. What can I do to get involved in some cases as well?
Yeah. And I think we talk about the long hours, right? We talk about how much time we spend with, on the job site, but that's also a tremendous amount of time that we spend with these people.
Correct.
Right. So if there's anybody that we should feel close enough to share, and have the opportunity, it's those. And sometimes it's just this trigger, like you said, of just getting people talking, making them feel okay to actually talk about it, because it is okay to talk about. And then the floodgates will open and others will share those information. I want to dive a little bit into, you were talking about, kind of being on stage and talking to groups about the mental health challenge. And I wanted to understand, when you talk to these groups and you're talking to leaders, what is it that they're looking for? What is it that they need in order to get these conversations and try and drive some change?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's evolved. Early on, it was, we have what kind of problem?
Right.
And there was some denial. There was the need for just, you're really, that's happening, prove that,
Right,
where's the data?
Mm-hmm.
And it really was an awareness push for some time. What we're seeing today is, okay, we get it. We've seen the data, right? CDC is pushing out, everyone's pushing out information. You have academia, universities all over the country that are stepping in and getting involved and sharing information. And now the big question I get constantly is, tell me what to do.
Right, exactly.
We understand there's a problem. Cool. All right, get it. What do we do to address it? How do I stop it? How do I take care of my people? Which is encouraging to see leadership come almost full circle in some cases, from a denial standpoint or the standpoint of being skeptical, and now here we are, we have them asking, come help. How do I get involved? What do I do? What's the best thing to do first? So,
well, one of the things when you and I first had a conversation, and I was sharing with you around Procore and the B1M have partnered to create a global mental health awareness campaign called Get Construction Talking.
yeah.
And I was, excited to share with you just some of the efforts that we had, and we actually just quantified the number of individuals we've been able to reach within the first year and a half, and it's 20 million.
That's incredible.
Been able to reach over
Huge
20
number.
million people with this message around Get Construction Talking. But you gave me a little bit of a response that I wasn't prepared for, which was you were critical around, we're past awareness, Sasha. We really are at the place of action. So I really want to kind of see if we can focus on what are you seeing? What is some of that action that leaders are taking, and how are they addressing this within their business?
Yeah. That's, and it's great to see that we're to this point, right? And just talking about it's not going to fix it anymore. And we don't want, as an industry, partners in the industry like ourselves, to just check a box, right? And just keep pushing out the awareness, because unfortunately that will happen in some cases. The action aspect of it, there's some really simple things that an organization can do. Educate yourself would be the biggest thing right out of the gate. If you have an employee assistance program, or if, from a union organized labor standpoint, if it's an MAP, a member assistance program, audit it. Highly recommend auditing that annually. Things change, coverages change, know what it's offering. And I've heard of organizations that have done such, and they've, for lack of a better phrase, they've fired their EAP or that service and have gone elsewhere. So, those are the two easy things right out of the gate. It's the continuation aspect after that, right? Unfortunately, because of the fast-paced industry, the work demand has not stopped, right? We're short-staffed. I don't want to see us as an industry get to a place where we're just checking a box. Like, well, we addressed that. Sure, we're good. It's the implementing the training from an educational standpoint. So there's a multitude of trainings out there for the industry and just society as a whole around mental health, suicide awareness and prevention, how to talk to people, how to be present, identifying signs and symptoms, ingraining that into your new employee orientation, taking it to the next level for new and upcoming leaders, in your apprenticeship or pipeline programs. So it's not just a one and done scenario, if you will.
And we've been talking a lot about that just in general. When we look at the productivity gap in construction, we've identified some of the root cause analysis is upskilling leaders. We're in a wholly new environment in many ways where we're looking at new challenges and new innovations that require a different skill set of our leaders. And there was one thing that you shared a little story, and I'd love for you to say about financial literacy.
Yeah.
Something I hadn't really considered. What does financial literacy have to do with mental health in this regard?
Yeah. So, there's a number of, you could call it root causes or contributing circumstances to the issues we're seeing in the industry that honestly have been around a long time. The financial aspect of it, these are high-paying jobs in many cases. I have a friend of mine, his son made $90,000 last year at 19. Left unchecked.
Right.
You could find yourself in some serious financial issues, right? Just because you're making that money one year doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case next.
Exactly.
Or in 6 months, right? The project could end, or the project stops because the company's having a financial issue. We're seeing that with some big name companies where there's projects are slowing down, they're laying off. So teaching our employees, our apprentices, how to manage their money, the real expectations of the industry, and what the workflow very well could look like. I think back when my dad was in the industry before he retired, and as soon as it started getting cold.
Yes, the seasonality.
He was off. I mean, it was almost a guarantee he was off for a few months. And, he'd do a little bit of work here and there, but it wasn't 40 hours, 60 hours a week like it is during the warmer season. And now we're seeing the transient aspect where people are traveling with the weather. Companies have gotten better, but teaching folks how to manage their money, what the real expectations are, how to budget is huge. And you would think we'd be, the workforce would be learning this early on in early education, and it just doesn't seem to be the case anymore, or is not as prevalent as it used to be. But we're seeing companies that are providing financial literacy courses for new employees. We're seeing apprenticeship programs do the same, which is great. And I think long term, there's no easy button. There's no light switch fix, if you will, where the whole I want it now situation or thought process. This is going to take time. I think generationally in the future, we'll see these actions that are being implemented into the industry, if you will, have a positive impact down the road.
And thinking about this industry, it is a very contractually driven industry. I can't tell you how many, Chris and I have known each other for over a decade. And a lot of what we have done in industry together is advocating for change. And I can't tell you how many times we've heard, until the contract changes, or I've had reporters, I've worked with reporters and editors and said, this is a really great change that's afoot. We're excited. And they've given me a great equalizer, which is until this is a legislative change or a contractual change, call me then. Yeah. But I've seen this too many years. What are you seeing around some of those contractual changes that is a positive trend towards addressing mental health?
Yeah, no, that's, there's, in my experience, if it's not in the contract, it's not happening. Right. Kind of situation, And after the contract's been, settled upon and awarded, good luck trying to get it in the contract, getting a change or a change order. We've seen some really positive things. We've seen owners and the contractors partner and work together to provide well-being services on a job site for a project. It's a long-term project where you're going to have 1,300 people or something on the job site
over several years, and that you need to keep them there. It might be in some remote location too, so it's really hard to get people to come and stay.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you're trying to attract the workforce, but then you have to care for them to a certain degree as well. Now, we've seen situations where there's been counselors on site. We've seen physicians, other medical professionals, where the employees have had access to them. Obviously, they had to schedule it, but they've had access to them during their work hours, which is incredible. You think about it from just the work hour standpoint. You work a 12-hour shift, or even just 10. You get off work. Are you going to be able to get to the doctor's office or the physical therapy or to go talk to a counselor or therapist about whatever you're dealing with? No, you're going to try to get home and beat the traffic, which you're going to get stuck in. So there's just not time for it. So the companies that are doing that are really revolutionizing projects.
I think there's a piece of that too that is tied to the work hours themselves, right? And we've seen examples of this in Australia specifically, but where people are kind of backing down this idea that, hey, construction is a 7-day-a-week job, right? That's kind of the expectation, but people taking a firm stance and kind of drawing a line in the sand is it's just not sustainable. And if it is, we need multiple crews, and there needs to be people just can't work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. It's just not possible. And they might be financially motivated too, because they're hey, look how much more I'm putting in my bank account. And that's a little bit of the financial literacy too of, hey, is it really worth it? And what other types of stress and strain are you putting on yourself?
Yeah. It's definitely a contributing factor. The expectation, the design of the industry, the way it's set up, the competitiveness of it, although needed, is unintentionally hurting our workforce.
Yeah.
Look at all the factors, and it all comes down to the competitive side of it, and to get the projects done quicker, right? Under budget.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster, and we really need to. It is going to take bold thought.
Yep.
It is going to take bold commitment to truly make a difference in the industry to curb some of this. And I believe it's going to require some discussions around what does the project really look like? What is sustainable for the
Right.
workforce,
Mhm.
but still provide a good, solid product,
Yep.
right? And completion time.
Yep.
Because projects are awarded whoever can get it done the cheapest and the fastest. And then there's typically, in some cases, a financial incentive on top of it
Mhm.
to get it done even faster. Well, who's doing that? It's the boots on the ground,
Right.
and it's impacting them the greatest.
I think there's a very inspirational story that we had the chance to hear in Australia. During the Get Construction Talking launch, we did a launch event in London. We then did one in Chicago, and then we did in Sydney. And there's a CEO, her name is Alison Myrams. I'm sure she's tired of hearing me say her name over and over. But I found her to be incredibly inspiring. And she was a CEO of a general contracting firm. And when she took the job, she said she asked herself, what are the prevailing challenges that this industry has faced that we have not moved the needle on in at least 2 decades? And she did something bold to what you were saying. She decided she was going to go to a 5-day work week. And she actually partnered with the city of Sydney to track that measurement because she had a lot of naysayers. She had a lot of fellow CEOs, not to mention boards, who were concerned with this idea of a 5-day work week. How are we going to meet our schedule? Well, spoiler alert, not only did she find that she could find owners who agreed to this 5-day schedule,
Wow.
agreed to paying her supply chain, but they were able to produce a report that's available online from Roberts Co., tracking the impact of a 5-day work week. And one of the things she said that I think is so important, she says, but that's just what we can measure. We could measure the productivity. We had less absenteeism. We had employees who had left the organization come back. So we had boomerang employees. So they cured a lot of their labor shortage. They had more people wanting to come back. But more importantly, she found owners that she could work with who agreed with her, who said, yes, this is how we want to operate. And we agree that this is how we're going to operate together. And so I think I always bring up her story because she did it.
Sure.
She even then retired.
Mhm.
So she did the full circle spectrum of a life of a CEO in industry, and even has this asset of a report that's she's left behind so that others can follow suit. But one of the things that I think is interesting in that conversation is the partnership with the owner. And I don't think that's something at least in the conversations we've been having, I don't think that's really something that's come up as much. What are you seeing from that owner side? What's that dynamic between the owner and the general contractor in this regard?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not happening enough. I think it's very much in its infancy, especially here in the United States. And I've even brought it up, and it's taboo in some circles where that's not a conversation that we're ready to have or willing to have. And
We don't want to risk losing that job because
and
we bring it up.
Sure, there's that aspect of it. And then we got to, that you mentioned the supply chain, and there's so many variables that come into play. Obviously, it's been accomplished though. So
Exactly.
it's not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And any subtle change would move the needle and make a big difference anyways, to get to a place where the owners and the contractors are discussing and saying, hey, this is a long-term project, but what about the short-term projects? Some companies are knocking those out in a relatively short period of time, and it's long hours and 6-7 days a week. The financial literacy aspect, and being honest with our workforce about what this really looks like, on a 5-day schedule or even a 6, that's optional rather than mandatory, right? To give them the option for overtime, because that's the first thing I hear all the time. You're talking about taking away our overtime. That's our bread and butter. I understand that, but long term, it is not that the little bit of money you're going to make over your career in overtime isn't worth what you're sacrificing. whether it's your own well-being or mental health. I think we're just starting the conversations, in some cases, the conversation's yet to be had.
Yeah.
With the owners and how can we partner? Again, there are companies I mentioned that are doing this. I've seen some companies, Nabholz Construction comes to mind, where they've actually brought in a medical professional, took them out of practice, and they're on staff full time and has a team, and they're really managing the health of their workforce through the company. They've, I don't want to say overnight, but relatively quickly have become a destination employer.
Amazing.
They're taking care of their people,
Mm-hmm.
and they're addressing everything from health concerns physically to mental health issues, and getting their folks the help and care they need, and still getting the job done.
And we've seen other examples of that too, whether it's physical therapy. I've heard of like dentists,
Mm-hmm.
like on site, like services that either are there all the time or come out on certain days, just because it's so hard to attract talent right now.
Sure.
That people are looking for this opportunity of it being a destination where people want to work. I think a lot of the things that we've talked up to this point require, some policy or contract change, right, in order to happen. But are there things that you think can really move the needle that leadership can do today that will help really make a big difference in a shorter period of time?
Sure. I want to touch on what you said about the on-site services. One of the projects I spoke at, 1,300 people at this event, they actually had reported that their well-being specialist for mental health and other services was seeing 80 people a month for an hour during work hours.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Wow.
But the project still got done, and in many cases ahead of schedule. So again, it can be done. What can leaders do right now, right, to help in the immediate? A lot of the times, it's just being open.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a CEO or you're an executive, having been boots on the ground level and now being in a executive level position, people look up to you, your workforce looks up to you, they hold you to a higher regard and think, oh, you've got it all together, right? Your life is great. You have no idea what I'm dealing with. Even if you're one of those CEOs that climbed the ranks, there's still that perception that, oh, well, you're up there in the ivory tower, so to speak.
Right.
You can't possibly understand what I'm dealing with at home.
Mm-hmm.
With my relationship with my wife or husband or my kids, or if I have a substance use disorder, because you got everything's perfect for you. And that's clearly not true.
Right.
So those leaders that are out there that are willing to be boldly vulnerable and come out and share, hey, I've struggled too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've seen companies that have enacted no alcohol policies.
Yeah, I was just hearing about that recently. Mm-hmm.
Aaron Witt from BuildWitt it was just on put a post out on LinkedIn where they're not allowing alcohol to be purchased on company cards unless it's a special circumstance, right? But for the most part, the way it read is that's over. That's a huge, bold statement, right? And policy to enact. Just being vulnerable, being human. I've seen leaders come out after I've come in and given a talk, or a colleague has, or there's been some interaction, or they've heard us, speak, or they've gotten involved at a conference or a task force meeting, or quarterly forum. And then we hear stories later that, I shared as a company, as a CEO or an executive, they shared with their company their struggles, their challenges, whether it was substance use disorder or depression, or maybe they're an attempt survivor as well, or they've lost someone really close to them.
Mm.
And it makes them more human, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And those employees kind of like, okay, they do get it, but you have to follow up. They're going to have to provide resources and continue. You can't, this is not a one and done situation.
So what are some of those resources, some of those things that are available today that they can follow up with, that they can make available to their teams? I think you have a lot of them because you've probably been involved in creating them and promoting them across as your travels.
Definitely in the promotion aspect, where I say we AGC's working on a training program right now that is not done. We're partnered with U-Turn Health, and it's going to be an incredible leadership program, if you will, training for the industry. Again, the educating yourself aspect, I could run off a list of different trainings that are out there. There's QPR, there's Assist, there's Learn, there's Vital Cog. There's a number of different training programs available, and it's finding what fits for your organization. I would ask that the industry doesn't look at this like, how quick can we get this done? This is a subject that really needs some time, right? You're going to have to commit some time to it, and the ROI has been all over the board in regards to investing in this issue in our industry. I've seen numbers early on from a 4-to-1.
Yeah, same.
I've seen numbers as high as 37-to-1 recently. And it's just there's so many variables there, but 4-to-1 on the low end is not a bad return. So really investing in the training, offering that, the simple conversational piece. Most projects have toolbox talks. We believe, from what we're still kind of looking into this still, but we early on partnered with the academia world and created the first toolbox talks that we know of to address mental health and suicide prevention in the industry. It was 5 toolbox talks, and it's evolved into 12 today. It's one a month.
Exactly.
We titled it Mental Health Mondays. It doesn't have to be Monday, but just one day a month. Find some time to stop talking about gloves and hard hats and, helmets or whatever you're talking about, fall protection. And let's talk about something else. Scratch that surface. You might be surprised what that does and who comes forward and either wants more information, just for knowledge purposes, or perhaps they're dealing with something, or they have a colleague that is. There's a lot of individuals that come forward and say, hey, my buddy that I work with is struggling. Can I get, just from a toolbox talk, posters, marketing materials? It sounds cheesy to say a good marketing campaign, but truly we need that. It's the awareness piece, but that sets that stage that, hey, it's okay to talk about this here, that you're not alone. We have resources. We're going to support you. So, yeah.
And I think that was one thing when Fred Mills from the B1M approached Procore, that was his desire and goal, was let's break the stigma around having this conversation first and foremost. And then let's create a path forward into action for both the business leader as well as for the individual, because we're not mental health experts. So that's really not our job or not our place. But when you're exposed to somebody, or somebody confides in you and says that they're at a crisis point, being able to say, call 988. Do you want me to call with you? Just being able to have an action for them to take, to have that intervention in the moment, I think is the critical piece. And along those lines, you've told us a story about the Hope coins that you've created. Tell us a little bit about those and how those have been.
I actually have one. I carry at least, I try to carry 2, one just for myself to talk about and one to hand out to folks. So we actually created these, we call a Hope coin. The original one, just full disclaimer, was created just before I came on board. It has since evolved, but it just looks like a little poker chip is all it is. And this was our answer to reach what some would say the unreachable. But this was our answer to reach them. Just talking to them about mental health, they're going to blow you off in some cases, historically. But being able to just hand them this little coin that has a message of, it says, you're not alone, call or text 988. And the other side says, your story isn't over. And hope, the acronym for hope is hold on, pain ends.
Mm.
The original, I've probably got over 30 now variations of this coin, which is incredible to see. Organizations from union, organized labor, companies all over the country. I've personally handed this out to individuals in 5 different countries that have them. And now we're seeing it move beyond the industry, schools, other industries, and just evolve. State of New York has their own coin, which is pretty cool.
Love that.
But it's a simple way to share a message of hope and some information. Whether it's 988, I've seen QR codes for companies specific services to get that info out there. And you don't have to just give it to someone. You just lay it on a job site trailer table or a coffee table, or have it in your cup holder in your truck, or on the console. Somebody gets in there, they're going to see it more than likely. It's a conversation piece. It might break the ice for a bigger conversation.
Okay, so we're going to ask 5 rapid fire questions.
Awesome.
The question is, what book are you currently reading or listening to that you would recommend to somebody else?
Currently reading Personal Mastery by Alvin Brown.
What advice would you give to your younger self if you were talking to them today?
Don't be so hard on yourself.
What place do you go to get a different perspective that can give you more information?
Podcasts, wide variety of them.
If the construction industry had a tagline, what would it be?
We get shit done.
And if there was one innovation or technology that was going to change our industry, what would it be?
I think it's the diversity of the industry as it evolves.
Why? Why do you think that is?
It's just different perspectives, different ways of doing things, different viewpoints, right? As humans, we naturally get into tunnel vision mode. Is how we've always done it, right? It's the only way to do it. And I think the diversity aspect of it, of all aspects of diversity, is going to revolutionize the industry.
And I want to add as well, the getconstructiontalking.org is the website. There's a toolbox talk you can download there as well. And again, there's instructions for if you're an individual, what can you do to get that conversation started? And if you're a business leader, what can you do to start to address this within your organization? So Brandon, I want to thank you for the time that you shared with us today and sharing your story with us, as well as you've been pioneering this you've been at it for a bit and you're on the road constantly. Honestly, we got you here today because there was a break in your schedule due to some of the weather that has been experienced in Florida. So it is kind of a miracle that we've had you here. But thank you so much for joining us today and sitting down with us.
Yeah, great to have you.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's a privilege.
And for those of you who are watching, we will put a link to some of the resources that we've talked about in the description for this episode. Again, if you or someone you know is in need of crisis intervention, 988, you can text or you can call. Even if you want to call on somebody else's behalf, there are counselors who can help you and do that. And if you feel anything from today, I hope you feel inspired to start a conversation. You don't have to be the expert in that regard, but just checking in on somebody. So with that, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And we will keep bringing you the stories of leaders in our industry who are evolving this industry and harnessing the power of construction.